It's almost Valentine's Day, and what better time to talk about authorial intent, interpretation and adaptation? Because I mean, what's more romantic than that? Alright, okay, stay. We will be talking about Pride and Prejudice, I promise. Are you still here? Hello? Hello! Today, we're going to be talking about interpretation, adaptation and authorial intent. How many ways round can I say those words? Well, there's only one more, but still. And we're going to be using some examples of each type of thing, and yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start with adaptation because that's what you're really here for. Adaptation is shifting a piece of media from one form to another form. Obviously, if you've been here before, you know that I mostly talk about books and stories here. So I'm going to be talking about adapting books into other pieces of media. So that's like adapting a book for a TV series, adapting a book for a film, or even about adapting a book for a video game. All of these are examples of adaptation. It's kind of like translation in a lot of ways, because there are elements of transformation and translation that have to happen when you transform something like a book into something like a TV series or a movie. It's the same with when you're translating something. You have to translate it not just directly word for word or into the sentence structure of the language you're translating to. If you don't speak more than one language, most languages have different structures to each other. So like, first one that pops into my mind is when I was studying ancient Greek at university. Not very good at it. Don't expect much ancient Greek. My ancient Greek tutor basically told us all that try and get into your head that the format of particularly ancient Greek language is to speak like Yoda. You put, can't remember. There's something to do with subject, verb, object that I don't understand because I'm too dyslexic. But basically the premise is that what people would call the most important part of the sentence comes at the beginning and the who's doing what comes after. Versus in English where the who's doing what comes first and the important what they're doing comes after. I hope that makes sense. So it's not just swapping those things around, it's changing up idioms, it's into something that makes more sense. Again, I studied this actually when I was doing A-levels in classical studies. We were studying plays, ancient Greek plays, and one of the things was like this, obviously what we were studying was a translation. We didn't have time to do like actual language courses, and we got to the point where it was like, okay, so he's calling him a crow here, but the reason, or a raven? No, it was a crow, I think. And the reason he's doing that is that like in ancient Greece that means a suck-up. And then there's further jokes about it later on because crows croak, and so obviously that's like a thing. So how would we maybe consider translating that if you wanted to get the meaning across rather than the direct word? And this is exactly what I mean by adaptation, about adaptation having to translate things. So when you are translating to something like a movie or a TV series, you have to make sure that you are putting it into the genre of the TV series, you're putting it into a format that a TV series can handle, that you're putting it into a timeline that a TV series can handle. If you took this book, my book, Merry Arlan Breaking the Curse, it would probably take about 7.5 to 8 hours to read this in an audiobook. Probably. This is just a guesstimation. And obviously a film particularly has to abide by the expectations of when you go into a cinema. So it's usually we're looking at no more than 2.5 hours. And honestly most of the time you probably want to get it to be less than that. Now obviously there's some stuff that doesn't have to be translated directly from text. Well, there's some stuff that when it's translated from something like text to screen really condenses. For example, on page 6 we have, I stumbled to the door, yanking it open to find Kitty looking sheepish, hands still raised from his infernal unending knocking. His hands shifted to pull his shock of red hair into its ubiquitous messy ponytail. The cream-coloured jumper he wore when he wanted to answer the door without changing up his pyjamas swamped him, making his short frame all the smaller. The sleeves extended to cover his hands as soon as they fell back to his sides. Now, if you're going to do that in film or TV, it's seconds. It's literally just ponytail. And then they begin speaking again. It's so much faster to do it in visual than it is in a written medium, because in the written medium You have to describe things. It's why it's so important for authors to read books. And all of that sort of is really important, but then there's also translating it into a movie or TV genre, a recognisable genre for the current landscape of modern TV and cinema. So, for example, Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is a novel that it was a contemporary novel. There's conversations about whether it's a satire or a romance. Let's say it's all of them. Let's say it's a contemporary romantic satire, which I think is probably the most accurate thing we can come up with these days. And therefore, when translating it into a modern medium like TV and cinema, you end up with translation issues. You end up with genre issues. So I'm going to be talking about two of the Pride and Prejudice adaptations and why they are both very good at what they do, because neither of them is doing the same thing. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the 1995 BBC series, because it's one of the most popular. It's the one with Colin Firth. You'll probably have heard it referred to as the one with Colin Firth. It's that one. The other one I'm going to be talking about is, of course, the 2005 Keira Knightley movie. The one with Keira Knightley. The Keira Knightley one, if you will. Those are the two I'm going to be talking about. Because neither of them is trying to do the same thing, but they are both, as far as I've seen, the most beloved and the ones that create the most discourse between fans. Like, it tends to be the case that people are a fan of one or the other, not both, sometimes neither. And as someone who has now read the book, finally finished it, I'm dyslexic. Took me a while. But as someone who has now finished the book and has seen both of these subsequent to finishing the book, I have thoughts and I wanted to share them. And I think this is the perfect place to do it. So the 1995 series has adapted the Pride and Prejudice contemporary satire romance novel that is in the Regency era, because it was written in the Regency era, so it's contemporary to the Regency era, not contemporary to now. They've translated it into what I would call a Regency TV series. Now you may be thinking, obviously that's the most faithful interpretation, because it was written in the Regency era, it's set in the Regency era, surely it should be in the Regency era as a genre. I didn't know that was a genre. Yeah, it's the historical genre. And yeah, you may be thinking it's the most faithful adaptation, and in some ways it is, and in some ways it's not. So the benefits of the 1995 TV series is that not only does it have more scope and more space to be able to keep more of the plot points and characters in, because it's, you know, got literally more time than a movie, but it does try very hard to fit to the Regency, the expectations of a Regency TV series. The problem comes in that because it's designed for a modern audience, there's also a lot of Regency explanation that has to happen. So like, a modern audience cannot be expected, even actively seeking out a Regency genred piece of media, cannot be expected to understand the intricacies of the Regency era. You have to put that into a modern version. You have to explain lots of the little bits about it, because it's not the norm anymore, and therefore you have to explain things. You have to be clear as to why exactly this is going the way it's going. And because of that, you have to spend more. You can't spend all of your however many hours there are in the BBC TV series on the actual content of Pride and Prejudice. On top of that, because of the way that modern, especially TV series and movies, but because of the way that most modern stories are told, most adaptations will pick a climactic point for their version of the story. And basically everything that happens after that is very, very rushed. Whereas in the actual novel of Pride and Prejudice, almost the entire third part is the courting. the re-courting, if you will, of Jane. Sorry, spoilers. I mean, hundreds of years old, but spoilers. Yeah, the re-courting of Jane is almost the entire third act, if I remember rightly, which I may not. Don't trust me on timelines. But it takes up a huge portion of the book. And the BBC TV series decides that Lydia's marriage is the thing that's going to be the climactic point of it. And so everything that happens after Lydia is married is so rushed. You don't get any of the stuff that happens other than Lady Catherine de Bourgh coming along and both people getting proposed to. Those are the 3 plot points they keep in. Everything else, chuck it, bin it, we don't want it. And that is the inherent flaw of any adaptation, is that they will always have to do that because of the limitations of the style. The 2005 version is a brilliant example of an adaptation because it's not trying to tell the story of Pride and Prejudice. You may be thinking, what are you talking about? Of course it is. It's a Pride and Prejudice movie. It's not. It's not trying to tell the story of Pride and Prejudice. It's trying to tell the story of Lizzie and Darcy's romance as shown in Pride and Prejudice. The 2005 Keira Knightley movie is a romance movie. That is literally what it is. And maybe it's because I've been reading the Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat book recently to try and make sure that my subplot romances are up to snuff, and maybe I might write some romance books in the future, who knows. Maybe it's because I've been reading that book. Or maybe it's just because I've got a better perspective of the actual story of Pride and Prejudice from having read the Pride and Prejudice book. Or maybe it's a combination of both. It's probably a combination of both. But I think the 2005 movie does a really good job at what it's trying to do. It does a really good job of being a romance movie, and it does a really good job of presenting Pride and Prejudice as a romance movie. It hits all the romantic beats that you're supposed to hit. And it actually gives time to the things that happen after Lydia's wedding, because the point, the focus of the movie is Lizzie and Darcy. And if your focus is Lizzie and Darcy, you spend a little less time on Lydia and a little more time on the aftermath. We're not going to get into Pride and Prejudice and zombies because I've already talked too much about Pride and Prejudice in the first place. Next we're going to talk about interpretation and authorial intent. We are kind of smushing these together. Interpretation is how each... Again, I talk about books, so I'm going to say reader, but it can be for anything. You can interpret anything. It's how each reader interprets the text. A lot of the time in your literature classes, if you took literature classes, the implication or outright statement might have been that your interpretation informs your understanding of authorial intent. Which is to say, have you seen the Blue Curtains meme? And if not, that's fine. I like the Blue Curtains meme. But basically what the Blue Curtains meme is trying to explain, or trying to reference, is that there's a thing that a lot of literature teachers, especially like high school, sixth form college, that kind of thing, literature teachers will try to do, which is where they will pick something like the Blue Curtains and try to get you to interpret and extrapolate from that, why are the curtains blue? What possible reasons might the author have had for doing that, and what do you think the authorial intent behind such a choice was? Authorial intent, however, is like the actual intent of the author. That's pretty self-explanatory. So your interpretation can inform your understanding of authorial intent, but it does not always. So, as a prime example, as an author of this, Mary's flat in Merry Arlan Breaking the Curse is green. Well, it's not all green. All of the furniture is green. And it would be very easy to interpret from there that the reason for the greenness of the flat is that it's the place where green is the colour of life and growth, and it's the place where Mary really lives and grows. Or gold is the colour of, like yellow, gold, orange is the colour of warmth, and if you mix that with the blue of Mary's past and heritage, no spoilers, don't worry, then you get green, and therefore that's the front of the book is blue because of Mary's history. That is true. Or it could even be interpreted that when I talk later about Kitty having, I think it's forests and life under his green eyes, it could very easily be interpreted that it's to do with that. That's a correlation. Would you like to know the authorial intent? I had to pick a colour. I knew it was going to be everywhere. My wife's favourite colour is green. Why is the kernel stripe green? I'll let you figure that one out for yourself, because the answer is still my wife's favourite colour is green. It is though, like, it's my wife's favourite colour, so why wouldn't I put it in the book? So the fact that half the reason that, oh gosh, this is a whole can of worms, half the reason that Mary's heritage is all blue toned is because my mum's favourite colour is blue. Like, I write for the people I love, and that is a huge way that I do that. It's so easy to interpret things in a way that the author didn't intend. Which is not to say that there's anything wrong with interpretation. Interpretation is natural, it's useful, it's brilliant. But sometimes we interpret too far, which is what the blue curtains meme is all about. Is that sometimes it is as simple as my wife's favourite colour is green, and other times it is as complex as the curtains are blue to symbolise the melancholy of the main character, and the more poetic the prose, the more likely the word is chosen on purpose. So, I'm not here to talk about poetry, I've said it before, I'm not a poet. But as far as I understand poetry, and bearing in mind that I haven't studied it since like 2012, as far as I understand it, because there are so few words typically in a poem, each one is usually chosen for a purpose. Unless it's one of those poems where they're actually just describing their environment, in which case it is distinctly possible that the colour of the curtains is just because that's what colour the curtains were. See, there's so much scope and room to manoeuvre within it. Sometimes your interpretation will reveal things the author didn't intend, but did do. Like, the interpretation, the idea that maybe Kitty's eyes are green, and that's why he likes green. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe I did do that on purpose. Or, like, maybe I did do that by accident, but it fits the character, so going on I'll do it on purpose. Maybe it is to do with growth. Maybe all sorts of things. Like, sometimes authors do things and we don't really realise why we've done them or what we've done. And there's nothing wrong with that as an author, because you're making so many choices. I mean, there's a lot of words in this book. Like, and the beauty of interpretation, and the most important thing about interpretation, is that the thing you need to figure out is that your interpretation is absolutely yours. And you're allowed to have it, and you're welcome to it, and you can argue the points all you want. Except don't argue with the author if they're telling you no, that's not it. Because if the author says no, that's not it, it's not it. But if you... The biggest and most important thing to remember about interpretation is that you have to be able to present a logical hypothesis. So your logical hypothesis about how Mary's flat is green because of the warmth mixing with the cold heritage. You have to be able to argue why exactly you think the author would do that. So that if somebody could go to the author, like anyone could come to me with questions about Merry Arlan breaking the curse, I'm right here making YouTube videos, writing more books. Like, anyone could come to me with questions about it. And if somebody came to me with your interpretation and said, hey, is this true? I'd be able to confirm or rebuke it, rebut it, deny it. I'd be able to confirm it, or I'd be able to say that it's not true. And, or rather that it wasn't my intent, my authorial intent, if you will. But that's not to say that your interpretation is any less valid because of it. Just because it wasn't in the authorial intent doesn't mean it can't be read into it. And interpretation informs adaptation so heavily. You see, we're all circling back round. This is why this is a 3-topic video. Interpretation informs intent so heavily. If you interpret Pride and Prejudice as primarily a romance, you're probably going to enjoy the 2005 movie more than the 1995 TV series. Unless you've got a thing for a wet Colin Firth. I don't get it, but meh. If you interpret Pride and Prejudice primarily a Regency life novel, you are probably going to enjoy the 1995 version better than the 2005. And all of these are fine, there's nothing wrong with any of them. You're allowed to have your preferences about it. I know I have mine. Like, I like both. I do like both. But honestly, the thing that pips it for me is that I like the casting in the 1995 version better. I think that I don't know whether it's the casting actually or if it's the direction, but I think that the acting in the 1995 version fits the characters the way I envision them just a little bit better than the Keira Knightley one. I think Keira Knightley does a great job doing what she does and being the way that Lizzie should be in the story, the version of the story that she's telling. But I just prefer the way that Jennifer Ehle does it. I don't know if that's how you pronounce her name. Ehle. It's written E-H-L-E, so I am dyslexic and stumped. If you want to find out more about this or this, all of the links for where to find me are in the description box below, right next to the like and subscribe buttons if you feel like sticking around. Bye.